Welcome, everybody, to the Parrot Club's July 2024 meeting. We're very pleased tonight to have Dr. Lauryn Benedict with us from Colorado. And Dr. Benedict is an ornithologist and animal behaviorist interested in avian vocalizations. She's worked mostly on wild songbirds, but the last few years has been studying the fascinating sounds of parrots. And she has research studies going with them that she'll be talking about tonight. She has a study called What Does Polly Say? That reveals how parrot species differ in the mimicry of human words and sounds. She'll also describe how you contribute to this research by reporting information about your companion parrot. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Benedict. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Okay, well, let me share my screen. I have a PowerPoint to pull up here. And okay, are you now seeing that in presentation mode? Great. Yeah, so thanks for inviting me. I'm going to tell you about some of these projects that I've been working on that have been really fun for the last 3 years. And as I said, if you have questions along the way, feel free to stop me, jump in with anything that I can answer as I go. Like I said, I'll try and keep an eye on the chat as well, so you can feel free to put things in there. So my name is Lauryn Benedict, as Amy said, and I'm at the University of Northern Colorado. And what I'm going to talk about is this set of projects that we are now kind of lumping together. We have a website, which is manyparrots.org. So if you go to that website, you can learn about the multiple surveys that we're running to try and do this. And we have a group of researchers who we are kind of calling the Many Parrots Research Team or Research Consortium that are really working on all of this together. And so just to acknowledge that this is really not just a talk for me. This is a talk for all of these people that I'm speaking on behalf of. So here's me out reporting wild birds. But we have a large group, and it's been really fun. I think one of the best things about this project is that we have this great international group of people working on it. So we have a couple of Polish contributors. This is Ada and this is Anna. We have a couple of contributors in the Netherlands. So Henken and Michelle, both professors at different universities in the Netherlands. And then we have a sort of linguistics group at the University of Vienna in Vienna, Austria, which is Ava and Victoria and Marissa. And then we have a collaborator in Japan as well. So we're trying to do this in multiple languages. And so we want to hear everything you can tell us in English, but all of these collaborators are also working on getting data from parrots in other languages so that we can learn about all of the things they can learn in terms of mimicking humans in English and potentially in Dutch and in German and in Japanese and so on. So I'll tell you a little bit of about some of these different collaborators as we go. But again, I just want to emphasize that this is very much a team effort. Okay, so then just to tell you a little bit about me first, as Amy said, I kind of came into the world of studying parrots via a career. I've now had 20 years or something like that of studying songbirds. And so I really started my career asking why birds sing and why they sing, what they sing, trying to kind of understand that. So I've spent the vast majority of my career studying songbirds, looking at a bunch of different questions to do with songbirds. So things that I'm interested in are how do they learn their songs or their calls? Why are different species different in what they sing? Why does a wren sound different from a blackbird, from a warbler? And then why do different individuals of the same species sound different? So why does one red-winged blackbird sound different from another red-winged blackbird? And then a lot of the research I've done is on female birds. Most of the research done on birdsong is studying male birdsong, but females also sing, and they've been studied a lot less. So my lab is also really interested in female birdsong. And so these are kind of some of the questions we're asking. I actually have a grad student, our other line of research, a grad student right now working on female red-winged blackbirds like this one singing. So sparrows, wrens, warblers, swallows, right? I've worked on all of these groups. I'm asking these questions about individual vocalizations. I'm really interested in how birds can learn and what they can learn to vocalize about. And I've mostly been doing it with these little Tweety birds. But of course, there's another group that learns their vocalizations in amazing ways, and that is parrots, as you all know. So sometime during the pandemic, I think it was, yeah, right around 2020 when we couldn't do field work anymore. And we were thinking about these questions about how birds learn and what they can learn and what determines which birds learn better than others. I was thinking about that. And then I was also thinking about how I'm studying female bird songs in the little Tweety passerine songbirds and how females don't sing much. But again, then comparing that with parrots, in parrots, females, the conventional wisdom says, most of the time, females can learn to talk and vocalize and mimic just as well as males can. So there's sort of all these really interesting differences, and parrots really seemed interesting to me. And so we thought, okay, maybe we can start asking some of these same questions in parrots. Okay. And there's another reason parrots are interesting. And so I'm going to show you some diagrams here. What I'm showing you on the left is essentially the family tree of birds. It's what we call a phylogeny. If you're not familiar with phylogenies or haven't looked at them before, you have listed here. Can you all see my arrow moving around? Yes, great. Okay. So these are, of course, different groups of birds. So you've got your parrots, you've got your songbirds, you've got falcons and owls and eagles, etc. And anything that has a close connection like this, that is the ancestor, the most recent ancestor of those birds. And oops, wrong way. As you can see, here are our song learning songbirds, and here are our parrots. And they are sorry, my thing keeps going backwards. And they are very closely related. So this learning process seems to be something that's common among all of them. So if we can learn more about how parrots learn, we can learn more about how all birds learn. So I really got interested in parrots. Okay. The other thing that I think is kind of fascinating about parrots in particular, and that led us to do the study that we started doing the way we did it, is that we know a lot about parrot brains. We actually understand what parts of the brain control vocal learning and vocal production in all of these different groups. So in songbirds, in parrots, and then also in hummingbirds, which is the other group of birds that can learn their songs. And you can see they've mapped out this whole set of circuits in the brain. And all of these circuits are really well understood. So we have a great understanding of the neurobiology that drives the learning process, but we don't know as much about what they're learning. We have all the like physiological data, but we don't really have behavioral data. And why is that? Well, parrots are really hard to study in the wild. You can ask my collaborator, Christine Dolan. So this is one of the people that is part of this group, this consortium. And Christine has been studying yellow-naped Amazons in the wild for 20-something years now. And the fieldwork is incredibly challenging because these birds, of course, are super high up in the trees. They're in flocks that can be very large, so it can be very hard to tell one individual from another. The way that we typically try to tell individual wild birds from each other is that we catch them. We put little colored bands on their legs, plastic rings around their legs, and each bird gets a different set of colored rings. So remember, I said I was studying those red-winged blackbirds. They get combinations. So one bird will have blue, yellow on one leg and red, green on the other. You can do this for parrots. You can catch them and you can put those plastic bands on their legs, but they don't stay for very long because, as I'm sure you all know, parrots have incredibly strong beaks and they pull them all off. So it's really hard to get individual data on vocal abilities of wild parrots, right? They're super difficult. However, these are species that also live in captivity with humans. And so we thought, well, maybe we can take advantage of this population of companion parrots and study vocal learning, not by looking at their kind of natural parrot communication, but by learning or looking at what they can learn from humans, because that should be kind of analogous. The ones that are really good at learning in the wild should also be really good at learning in human environments, is our thinking here. So that's why we developed these projects, right? And so this is just an image of the web page that I mentioned that we are running here. And this first project that we started working on is the one that's listed on the left, the What Does Polly Say project, where we started asking people questions about how many words their bird knows. And maybe some of you contributed to this. And if you did, thank you. I really appreciate it. We could not have done this without public contributions. And that's the first one. So what I'm going to talk about now is I'm going to tell you some of the results, which if you read the paper, this does repeat some of that, but I'm here to answer questions and I hopefully will give you, some interesting insights into it. And then we've also started this new project with this larger collaborative group trying to understand singing and speech patterns in parrots. And so I'll talk a little bit about that too. All right, so if you took our survey, you are familiar with this page, you've seen it, right? You went here, you filled out this survey. We, as of maybe a year and a half ago, had about 900 responses. And at that point, we stopped and we analyzed some data and we published some results. I just checked it, we're now at 1180, which is awesome. So we have a couple hundred more, which is fantastic. We will keep going. We will keep taking responses for a while because we are still using the data from this and we're going to do more research using the expanded data set. So that's, if you know people, with talking birds, tell them to keep adding to our poly data set. We love it. All right. And so if you took the survey, you will remember that what we really asked people in this survey was how many different mimicked sounds, phrases, and words does your parrot use? And a sound is anything that's mimicked from its human environment, like not a natural parrot sound, but a doorbell, a dog bark, things like that. A phrase is a phrase, just a human language phrase, and a word is a single word within that phrase. And when we study bird vocalizations, whether it's parrots or songbirds in the wild, we often look at their songs as kind of a unit that is made up of a whole bunch of little chunks or syllables. And so we're kind of thinking of this the same way. The phrase is that song unit equivalent. And then all of those little chunks are syllables that we would measure in a typical bird vocalization or those different words. So when a bird learns different phrases, it's actually very analogous to what it does in nature when it's learning all of the communication songs or vocalizations that it would use with its peers, its other parrots in the wild. So we thought this was hopefully a good way to estimate vocal learning ability in social birds. And the data that we got from that, this is the paper that we published from it, and there's a link to it at the bottom here, but I think I also sent it out. I think it was in the email that Amy sent out. So if you're interested, you can check out the paper. And I'm going to tell you some of the major results of that now. All right, so what did we do for this particular survey? Well, this is all the data from that What Does Polly Say questionnaire that we asked everyone to fill out on Google Forms. And this is as of that time period when we had 898 responses. So that's what went into this. That included 78 species of parrots. And I'm going to focus on 19 of them because those are the species for which we had at least 10 responses. Not surprisingly, our most common species in the data set were African greys. We had something like 150 of them, which was fantastic to have that good sampling on them. But we had a good wide range. We had about 300 females, maybe about 470 males, maybe, as you will see, some unknown, and then a pretty wide age range from 0 to 54, although most of our birds were at the younger end of that age range. And then most of these parrots also interacted regularly with other parrots, and sometimes parrots of their own species, sometimes parrots of other species. Okay, so we use all this data to ask which parrots are best at learning different things, right? Which are the best vocal learners? What factors predict this kind of parrot mimicry ability? Yeah, so here is some of the factors that we looked at. All right, first one, does species matter? What do you all think? As parrot owners, do some species of parrots learn better than others or learn vocal mimicry better than others?
Absolutely.
Yeah. What do you predict is going to be the best? Anyone want to guess?
Probably the gray.
Actually, the budgie is the bird that has the budgies have the largest vocabulary of any parrot, but they're just a little bit hard to understand. But they've actually outshone African greys in numerous studies.
Cool. Well, that's interesting. When we did it with you, the sort of human reporting, we got grays was the answer for us. So some budgies might have larger repertoires of phrases and words. That's really interesting. But with the data that we had reported with it wasn't 150, it was 187 gray parrots in here. Those are the ones that had consistently the most. So what this graph is showing you is the number of different mimicked sounds from 0 to 30 on average, the number of different phrases, 0 to 30 on average, and the number of different words. And here are gray parrots right in the middle. So those are the highest. Budgies actually, you know, they're doing pretty well on phrases, but they weren't, from our data, the highest. We had grays, and this was a sort of surprising turquoise-fronted parrot. And down here, sulfur-crested cockatoo were some of the ones that had large phrase repertoires. It was super variable, though. You will notice we have some error bars on here. There were, for pretty much every species that people reported, there were some birds that had like 1 or 2 words or phrases, and then others that had 30 to 50 or more. So it seems that species matters, but it also seems like there are huge differences between individual birds, as I'm sure you all know.
Now, I'm trying to remember from filling out the survey, where does it fall into sounds? I mean, cockatoos in general, a lot of them don't speak. I mean, there's some that do, but they're able to imitate many songs. So they don't necessarily do sounds like a microwave beeping, but they will readily imitate all kinds of whistled songs. So does that fall under sounds?
That would be sounds. Yep. Yep. And cockatiels are actually, as you point that out, that's a great point. If you see in the graphs here, that cockatiel sound repertoire is larger than the average phrase or word repertoire. So that fits with that general understanding. Yeah.
Is there any place that you can get this graph?
It's in that paper, in that publication. So we, I know it was in the link that Amy sent, but I can also, I can afterwards, I can find the link and send you that. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Cool.
Sure.
All right. So yes, species matters. On to our next question. Does sex matter? So do males and females have differences? And for me, coming from the songbird world, being interested in female bird song, this was one that I was really interested in. Generally, parrot researchers tend to think that males and females are pretty similar in their learning abilities in most parrot species. But there are certainly some species that we're not sure about. So what did our data suggest? Well, I'm going to take you on a little detour here before we perfectly answer that question, because we saw some really interesting patterns in terms of sampling. So we wanted to ask whether these vocal learning abilities kind of varied by sex, whether males or females tended to have, say, larger repertoires. But the first thing that we noticed in our data set that really stuck out was there was a difference in reporting. So we had something like 60-some%, maybe more than that, of the birds in the data set were male. And we're like, okay, maybe that means that males are more likely to learn to mimic humans. They might be more vocal because we're getting more males reported, right? So that might be an indication that males learn more. But we also had a question in, oh, there I see Amy put the link to the article. Thank you, Amy. We also had a question in the survey, if you remember, which was, how did you determine the sex of your parrot? And that was really interesting. So we're not actually sure that this means that males are better mimics and more likely to learn, because when we look at that kind of confidence in our sexing data, things get a little bit more complicated. So if we ask, how'd you determine the sex of your bird? Sometimes people said things like, it lays eggs. And then we were highly confident that it is a female, or I had it genetically sexed, and we were highly confident. But if they said I determined it via behavior, or, you know, the previous owner told me, or something like that, that's a pretty low confidence assignment. And so if we look at the sex sort of rates of sex and confidence and how many males and females we have, in the birds that were sexed with high confidence, we're pretty close to 50-50 male-female. In the birds that were sexed based on behavior or other low confidence mechanisms, we're actually significantly more males. So if people don't fully know the sex of their bird, they're more likely to assume it's a male, is kind of what we're taking away from this. We think that a lot of people who have birds of somewhat uncertain sex assume that they're males. So the first conclusion here is, if your bird talks, don't assume that it's a male, which it seems like some people do. And the second conclusion is, we have pretty close to 50-50 males and females in the data set when we're sure of their sex. So actually that seems to suggest that males and females are talking somewhat equally. All right, but we did see some sex differences. So I just want to give you a few examples of some of the really interesting things we saw here. So in the cockatiels, we have 86% of the birds that were reported were male. And people were pretty confident about those sexes, right? We had high sexing confidence. So that does seem to suggest that male birds are more likely to mimic humans than females are to learn how to talk. But this was really interesting because when they do talk, females don't have smaller repertoires. Females that talk have just as many words and phrases as the males do. It's just that fewer females do it, if that makes sense. So that's kind of one type of sex difference. In budgies, we had sort of low sex and confidence, 69% male, but we're not sure of that. It might be, we'll see. But a lot of people, I think, are not genetically sexing their budgies. In this group, though, males had larger word and phrase repertoires, even in the birds where they were confident of sex. So this might be a species in which males really are better at vocal learning. And this mimics what we know about kind of natural learning in budgies, because male budgies will, when they pair with a new female, they will adjust their vocalizations to match their female. So they might have a real kind of biological tendency to be good at changing their vocal learning. So that one was really interesting to us. Here, let's see, I have a comment. Yeah, male, okay. So you have a teal and the male knows words and songs and the female doesn't so much. Yeah, somehow maybe those female cockatiels are not quite as good as males at mimicking humans. Interesting, isn't it?
So, now I have a question though. In terms of filling out the survey, wouldn't you think there's a bias in that generally people whose birds do mimic sounds or words are the ones who filled out the surveys, and that if people had birds that didn't mimic, they wouldn't fill out the survey at all? So people whose, for example, cockatiels, the vast majority of females don't imitate songs or speak, and that those people then wouldn't fill out the survey, so the survey would make it look like the sex ratio is more equal than it would be in real life.
So the way we're thinking about it is that because of that bias that you just mentioned, that people who have a talking or mimicking bird are more likely to fill out the survey, that's going to lead to, the skewed data in there. So what we're interpreting this 86% male to mean that, of all the cockatiels out there, it's more likely that males are going to be mimicking, and that's why we get the majority of our responses are male.
Or male, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right, and then the last example I have here, the blue and yellow macaw, beautiful bird, right? In this one, we had only 35% male. We actually had more females than males in the data set by a pretty large margin. And this is a bird or a species for which we have pretty high sexing confidence. And this one was interesting because although we had mostly females reported, so clearly females are regularly talking, males were reported to have larger repertoires. So that's one where there are some differences in sort of a likelihood of mimicking humans seems to be more likely females. And perhaps in males, though, they can learn a more diverse set of sounds. So that's a really sort of interesting set of ways that birds can vary by sex. And we have people sort of looking into these and trying to understand more, but we thought they were interesting patterns. So we're taking away from this that there can be sex biases, but they can be different in different species. The other point, though, that I want to make relative to sex is that these are unusual species, right? These are a few that kind of jumped out at us. In general, when we looked across the whole data set and did some statistics on all 900 birds, males and females were generally equally good learners across most species. That's kind of the main takeaway. Yeah. All right, so sex matters in some interesting, complicated ways. How about age? This is an interesting one. We had a suspicion, or we hypothesized that maybe older birds would have larger repertoires, right? They've had much longer to learn. If you are a 50-year-old bird, you have 50 years to learn a whole bunch of words and phrases, and maybe you've expanded your repertoire over that time. So we were kind of expecting to see that. Also because we know that in the wild, parrots they're what's called open-ended learners. They can continue to learn sounds throughout their life. And we're very confident that they can continue to learn throughout their life. So that should create a larger repertoire by the time they get older, right? Maybe. Here I'll show you an analysis we did just on the gray parrots, because that's sort of the cleanest one here. And if we look across the juvenile birds, and we start with that, here's a graph that shows you age across the bottom and their phrase repertoire here. And when they go from 0 to 4 years old, they increase their phrase repertoire. So yes, they are learning, they are increasing the size of their vocabulary over those 4 years. That's good, that's what we expected. How about among adult birds though, 4 and above? If we look at those older birds, and we have a range here you can see from 4 years all the way up to 50-year-old birds, we didn't see that older birds had bigger vocal repertoires, which was really interesting to us, right? We expected that they would, but they don't seem to. And so we thought about this. We know that they continue to learn throughout their lifetimes, but we're wondering if maybe instead of kind of expanding their repertoire, they're just replacing parts of it. When they learn something new, they're dropping other things out, or they don't learn if they don't shift to a new social situation. But our kind of takeaway on this one is that they absolutely can learn new sounds, but the repertoires aren't expanding. And that was super interesting. And we thought about this again, thinking about wild parrots. So wild parrots often use their sounds in order to fit in with their social group. So when they move to a new social group, they learn the new sounds of that group. And that learning is really important for being able to move between different social groups across their lifetime. But when they learn those new social group sounds, they don't need to sing their old social group songs or use their old social group songs because they've left that group, right? So they typically, in the wild, when they move around, have the ability to learn new things in their repertoire, but they're replacing the old things. And so the whole repertoire doesn't seem to be getting bigger, which might be what we're seeing in this, in companion parrots as well. So, yeah. Interesting. And I see a comment here, yeah, that some birds continue to learn and some don't. And I also wonder for parrots that live with one owner for their whole life, they've never changed that social context. So do they need to learn the new words, right? Whereas if you have a parrot that has moved to a new home, that new home doesn't necessarily know all of the words that the parrot said with its old owner. And so if the parrot learned new words and changed its repertoire, we don't always have a record of that. So it's a sort of really interesting question about how birds are learning and what they say and what they choose to actually speak at any given moment in their life. Cool, okay. So a few other sort of interesting things here. So we asked about the size of their different repertoires. We also asked questions about improvisation, wondering if parrots can do what humans do, which is to rearrange words into new syntax and sort of change the meaning. If I say, the dog is in, or the table is on the ball, that's very different than the ball is on the table, even though it's the same words, right? And so we wonder if parrots rearrange things. And then we also asked how good parrots are at understanding context and using their words and phrases correctly in terms of human context. So those were two things that we asked the survey takers, and I'll just show you the answers to these because I think they're really interesting. When we asked if parrots improvise new phrases by reorganizing the words and phrases, the number here, so the chunk of the pie is the average or the total out of all 900 birds, but then this is by species. So some species we got 10% never did it, and some species we got 79% never did it. In general, a lot of birds never rearrange their words. If they use words in a phrase, they always use them in the same phrase. We had a lot of birds, though, that did sometimes rearrange things, and even some that did so frequently, which was really interesting to me, that they would mix up those different parts. And it's unclear, they didn't always mix up the different words and phrases in ways that made sense following, human language conventions, but it's interesting that they can play with them because that's what birds in the wild do as well. If they have a whole complete vocalization made up of different syllables, they often will move those syllables around. So this kind of reflects that. All right, how about the next one? The next one I think is one of my favorites. Does your parrot spontaneously use mimicry words, phrases, etc. in appropriate context? And we said spontaneously because we didn't want it to be like I walk in and say hello and then the bird repeats it back to me hello, right? It has to be just I walk into the room and the bird says hello spontaneously. And most of them do, right? The majority of parrots are using their words in appropriate contexts, which is pretty incredible, right? Because they're not just learning vocal mimicry, they're not just learning to copy a sound, they're learning when to use that sound, which is, I think, shows really advanced cognitive function, which is not surprising because we all know that parrots are very smart, but I think this is great evidence of that. All right, and then a third thing that we asked in here that we're now doing some new things with is this question, which was an optional question, but we just said, what are some of the words and phrases that your parrot uses? Just trying to know what kinds of topics, what do parrots talk about, right? What kinds of things? And first I'll show you a word cloud for all of the words that were reported more than 5 times. And so that's this, and you can see some words that are probably not surprising, right? Good, hi baby, bird, love, hello, all of those typical words. I'm sure step up is in here somewhere, I would think, but yep. There are also some fun ones, like those down there, right? Were reported multiple times. And Alexa, anybody have a bird that says Alexa? That can be dangerous. So yes, they will learn all sorts of words. We're now doing one of our kind of upcoming new projects is we're working on analysis of the words that they say, and we're working with the linguists. So this group in the University of Vienna, which I think we can see here, Dr. Marissa Hascheli, Eva Reinisch, and Victoria Gross, and they are, so Eva and Victoria are linguists by trade, and Marissa is a animal biologist who's interested in musicality. And so we're interested in these words and wondering, what are the topics or sort of semantic categories that birds use? And by semantic category, we mean like, yeah, what sort of type of word is it? And how often do they use these different things? And so we categorize these. Victoria really did all of this work to categorize these for 5,000 different phrases, more than 5,000 phrases that birds said, from 877 different birds for which we had this data. And I will let you guess, what are the main categories that, just in your head, you can guess, what are the main categories that we might have found? Well, here is how we categorized it. And this is all preliminary data, it's not published yet. But the first sort of topic or main thing was greetings. They say hello, they say hi. I think we include things like bye-bye, goodbye in that. So there's a lot of that. There's also a lot of words about affection, which is interesting to us because, of course, in nature, as I talked about, all of these parrots are in these fission fusion societies, and there's a lot of social bonding that goes on there. So if they're learning words about affection, that probably reflects their relationship with their human owners, that they're generating that affection, but it's also an artifact of their social tendency in the wild, the fact that they are creating those social bonds, naturally when they're out there in their wild habitats. And then the third one that I find really interesting, and so now I'm working on a specific sort of dedicated paper on this, is names. They use their own names a lot, and then they use the names of other individuals. And this is actually pretty interesting and amazing in animals. I don't know, did any of you see the recent coverage about the paper showing that elephants have names? It got a lot of press, and this was a really big, really big finding that elephants might be able to use names for each other. And all of us who know parrots and work with parrots are like, well, yeah, they understand names. Animals can use names. Of course, parrots use names correctly all the time. So this is sort of evidence of that. We've got a lot of name use in the parrots, which I think is really cool. Okay, and then the last thing that we're sort of another big topic following up on the linguists that we're really interested in is this musicality. And we had a little bit of this in the What Does Polly Say survey, just when people reported some of the songs or whistled tunes that their birds use. But this is kind of a future direction. This is something we are really trying to study in the future. And here's our musicality group. So these are many of the researchers that are interested in this, trying to understand how animals understand music. right? What can they do in terms of musicality? And so this is very much the genesis of, one of the reasons that we're doing this next survey, the Bird Sing Along and Speech Project. And this is the sing along part. So what the Bird Sing Along and Speech Project asks people to do is to record their bird singing, whistling, or speaking. And then, if they can, to record the model of that. So if you taught your bird to say, step up, or it copies you and says, step up, and you could record your bird saying, step up, and then you can record yourself saying, step up. We're going to do some speech comparisons on that. If you taught your bird to whistle the Addams Family tune, which a lot of birds do, if you could record your bird whistling the Addams Family tune, and then record yourself whistling the Addams Family tune, we can do a lot with that. So the musicality group with information like that can start to ask questions about how well the parrots are matching speech sounds, whether some species are better, some older birds are better, males or females are better, and whether this is similar to the way that humans learn language. They want to ask questions about emotional and behavioral context, because one of the questions we have in the Bird Sing Along and Speech Project is, in what context does your bird use this? So, it might be a bird saying its own name, but it only screams its own name when it's really agitated, and therefore there might be some emotional content in that sound. And there are actually predictions about, across all animals, when they are more angry, their voices get rougher. And when they are sort of frightened, their voices get higher pitched. So we're going to see if some of those things play out in parrot sounds too. And then for the musicality, they want to ask questions about relative pitch perception, how well they follow melodic contours, how they interpret rhythm. Have some of you seen videos or research on the dancing birds, right? The dancing parrots that are incredible at rhythm. And so we would love to understand how they do that and how well they do that. And so we have on this musicality team a whole bunch of people that have already published on bird musicality. So here's just one example of that. So this is from our collaborator Yoshi Seki. So this is our Japanese collaborator, Dr. Seki. And he has a paper on how cockatiels can sing human music in synchrony with the playback of the melody, which is a pretty impressive ability, right? That they can adjust the musical contours and match it, both the rhythm and the sound. And so we want to be able to investigate that a little more thoroughly. All right, so this is the project that is our newer project that has more, we're really looking for contributions to it right now. And if you have any recordings, or if your bird talks or whistles or sings or any of those things and could make some recordings, we would love for you to contribute those to this project. And the way, or what we're asking people to do, is essentially record that audio of your bird singing, and you can do that with a cell phone, right? We don't need super fancy recording equipment or anything like that. And on our website, we have some suggestions of apps that you could download to get good recordings. And if you're sitting around with your parrot, you can just point your cell phone at it, press record, see if it'll talk for you. And then what we want to match that is a recording of yourself either saying the same phrase or whistling the same tune or something, because if they learned from you, we want to be able to compare their mimicry of that model, right? It's nice for us to have the matched model and the mimic. If
the source was a commercial source, should we record that and then use that?
You can tell us that. If you can link to it in the survey, that's also an option. The survey asks a number of questions. It asks, first of all, upload the recording of your bird, then upload the model, but it also asks, what is the title of the recording if it learned it from a recording, and who's the artist, and so on. So you can tell us those things, and then we don't need you as the model, because we would have that. So the survey gives you that option too. Yeah, good question. Yep. And then the survey also asks things like, what is the context that they use it in, so we can try and study that emotional context and so on. And yeah, we've got suggestions, and we are happy to help people, think about how to make recordings. And hopefully, if we get enough of them, we can start to look at all of these amazing abilities of parrots and the differences between different birds, different species, etc. All right. So that's kind of my big overview, right? We have our major projects. I'll give you just a reminder of things I told you today, the results summary to date. Different species seem to be really different. As I mentioned, we have new data. We have a lot more data than we did when we published that first paper. So we want to expand that and try and look at, you know, even more birds from even more species to try and understand the differences between them. Sex-based differences, and we want to follow up again on that too. So if we can get more recordings of budgies and cockatiels and all of those species with sex differences, we can look at those tendencies. And then some of that age patterning that's really interesting. We actually added a question to the survey, which is, when is the last time your bird learned a new word, which wasn't in there originally? And so now we're going to have new data on timing of learning in different species. And then if we think about how parrots talk, well, so they tend not to rearrange as flexibly as we do in syntax, but they can rearrange a bit. Like they can move words around within phrases, and they can definitely use their phrases in context, which we find really fascinating. And they mostly, when they're using phrases in context and at other times, they're spending a lot of time talking about social bonding, right? It's greetings, it's affection, it's names, it's so much social bonding, which very much makes sense, both from that human interaction perspective, because they have to bond with the humans that they live with, but also because they are social creatures. And in nature, a lot of what they do is social interaction. So those are kind of the big things we've learned so far. Now we're trying to get into these new questions of how parrots sing and whistle, right? Exactly what are they doing? How good are they at those mimicry traits? Which individuals are the best of it and are the best at it? And you know, when and how are they learning different parts of human speech and musical abilities? So this is where we would love if all of you would help us get the word out about these surveys. If you belong to any parrot groups, if you are on Facebook groups, if you work at a parrot rescue that has talking and singing birds that come in and out, and you want to record a few and send us those data, that would just be fantastic. We know that we very much realize that it is a big ask to ask people to record the bird and then record themselves. That the bird sing along and speech survey takes more of your time than the What Does Polly Say survey. And we get that. So we thank you if you are willing to contribute. We really, really appreciate that. And, you know, we would love for you to spread this widely. And we have on our website both of these surveys in 7 different languages. So if you know someone elsewhere in the world who speaks French or Dutch or German, you know, and you know parrots that speak these languages, we would love to get data from them too, because we think it would be really interesting to compare speech patterns when birds are learning different languages, right? All right, so with that, I would love to thank all of the people that helped us get the word out on all of these different things. And that's my contact information. If anybody would like to contact me with questions or comments or any kind of follow-up, I am more than happy to chat about these topics anytime. And that's what I've got.
This is just amazing. This is amazing. I'm sure everybody was very excited about this. I know I have so many questions. I'm sure other people do. Well, I mean, one stupid little thing that's bothering me is how many people do not know how to sex a budgie. Budgies are like the easiest birds to sex. And the fact that so many owners don't know what sex their budgies are is just sort of mind-blowing. But one thing, I mean, I'm sure you're online a lot. You've probably seen this, a couple of interesting phenomenon. One is that I've seen so many birds have learned from other birds of the same species or other species online. So like I can just tell you, in cockatiels, I've seen it where one cockatiel makes up a song. And now 10 cockatiels are singing that same song because they've been watching the video and they all sound alike, which just, again, is amazing to sort of these songs end up going around the world. And the other thing is, I don't know if you're interested in this, but I've seen so many videos where birds are talking to each other. And what I think I see it most commonly in Indian ringnecks, where you get 2 Indian ringnecks, end up having a whole conversation with each other, and often in context, which again is sort of mind-blowing. And I don't know if that's something you're looking into as well.
No, that would be really neat. Interesting. Yeah, we did ask in the initial poly survey, we asked, does your bird live with other birds? And I didn't talk about it here, but we did do some analyses to see if the birds that lived socially with other parrots had larger repertoires, larger vocabularies, used more human words. And interestingly, they didn't. It didn't seem to make a difference. And then we started wondering, well, maybe that makes sense because if the birds are together, they're going to be learning sort of more bird sounds amongst themselves rather than sharing their human sounds or their mimicked sounds. But we fully expected that social interaction, yeah, they would be teaching each other words and so on. And we didn't see evidence of that, which was kind of interesting. But I think we know they can do it because, as you say, there's lots of examples online. And I remember there was that story about the birds in the British animal park that were teaching each other to swear and this was causing problems. Yeah.
Well, even in wildbirds, I think it may have been with Amazons. There were some studies in South America where a captive bird ended up released and knew some human words, and like 3 or 4 generations down the line, there were wild birds who had never seen a human who were using human speech because it had ended up being learned and passed down from generation to generation. So,
oh, that's cool. Yeah, I need to find those examples. That's really neat.
yeah, I don't know if you're interested at all in birds that aren't our own. Like if we see a video that is particularly interesting in terms of what a bird has learned to sing or say, if you're interested in examples of those.
Yeah, well, if those people who are posting them would give us permission to analyze them, that would be fantastic. I mean, we would love that. So that is something where we actually do, there's several graduate students working on this project, and one of them is a master's student who is reaching out to some people who are kind of frequently posting online clips of their birds talking and saying, would you allow us to analyze some of these differences?
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I was watching a cocktail today doing an incredible job on opera when that's not usually their forte, that's usually the Amazons. But this cockatiel was doing an absolutely perfect rendition of this opera, complete with using his foot conducting while he was singing it.
Wow.
It just blew my mind. Yeah, I'll open up. Anyone who wants to jump in and answer questions, you can come on, open your mic.
I've had 2 blue-fronted Amazons, one for 23 years and my other one now for 24 years. The first one was a male and said 70 words. My female only says 20, but then now I live alone and I don't think hears as much speech as the other one. Mostly what she learned from a baby when she was with other birds, when she was a baby. But the most amazing thing, my other bird that said 70 words, it would call my dog.
Yeah.
My dog's name was Buck, and it would say in my voice, it'd go, Buck, come here. The dog would come in the room and then it'd go, bad dog. And the dog would run out of the room with his tail between his legs. So definitely context.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the most interesting. But also people would knock on the door and it would keep saying just a minute. And my neighbors watched this going on when I wasn't home. And people would, get frustrated because nobody would come to the door. So there was definitely a sense with that bird context. And I think it might have been a wild bird. And it was probably around 4 when I got it.
So that's interesting. So it absolutely then posted as an adult, it was learning human words.
Tons of words. Whereas my other bird that I've had for 24 years since a baby, not as many words. Mostly she learned what she says. She said when she was a baby, she's learned very little. She does a lot of sign language with me, or just certain sounds that I know what she means. So she doesn't really speak, but to say I love you, she puts her wings like that, towards, but she will not say I love you. But that means I want you, I love you, and she's done that to several different people. So she's more of just, like I said, kind of a sign language.
That
with birds.
Gayla brings up a very good point. I wonder if there's a difference in speech between parrots that live with just one person and parrots that live with.
I would think so.
Hmm.
That's what I really think. So the other one that said 70 words was a male. And then my other one, my one that I have now is a female. But
I
she
have a quick,
My macaw that I had for 45 years, I lived alone when I first got him, and I knew he was under two because his eyes were black, and when they become two, there's white around the eyes. And he was in a pet store, so he started picking up a lot of things. And he only lived with me, but I used to turn the TV on. So I knew every commercial, and his favorite word was Alka-Seltzer. So he would go, Alka-Seltzer. And so I knew he saw the Alka-Seltzer. And then when he watched, because I'd have the TV running, when he watched I Love Lucy, he would scream Ethel for a whole week. It was like Ethel, Ethel. And by the time he passed, he had a vocabulary of over 500 words.
Wow.
I have a cute story about cognizant, about them understanding what they say. I have a Triton, and we've had her almost 20 years. She was a rescue, so we don't know how old she is. But so she might be 35, 40, because she's getting a little arthritis. But she was on the floor, and I was in my computer chair, and I didn't know she was on the floor. And so when I moved the computer chair to get away from the computer, she was on the floor, and she backed up and she said, "You scared the pretty bird." So the cognizant making that connection where she made that statement, I was blown away.
Wow.
And then our male sulfur crested cockatoo, when I cover him up at night, he'll say, "Good night, sweetheart. Love you, sweetheart."
Yeah.
Which is just adorable. And getting back to the Triton, when my husband goes in and takes the papers out in the morning at the bottom of her cage, she goes, "What are you doing?" So they understand. They're amazing.
Nope.
They're just such a fascinating. Yeah, they're fascinating.
Yeah, that's great. And if you have birds that have passed or something, but you remember all the details, you can tell us about those in the mini
Okay.
Parrot surveys too. Yep.
Well,
That's the two
my
surveys I had to fill out.
My new bird I've had, it was his birthday the other day. He's 10 years old, and he was not talking the way my first macaw was talking up a storm. So I turned on SpongeBob, and he sees it 3 times a week, and now he started talking, and he's now really forming his words. And I'm leaving commercials on. Usually I put them on mute, but I'm leaving them on.
Mhm.
And I see that he's picking up the words and he's starting to talk more and more.
Cool.
You know
Don't
what's
you notice that they tend to respond to higher voices? Like my parrot, my first parrot, first time he heard Michael Jackson with his high voice, went crazy, loved it.
Hmm.
Then my bird, I came home from taking my bird for a walk, turned on TV, and it was Lady Gaga. She went crazy with Lady Gaga. Now I have to play Lady Gaga almost every night for her. But they respond to the higher voices.
That's one of the
Yeah.
things that we actually think that we're planning to measure with the speech project when we have recordings, because we think that their parrot voices are going to be higher. So when we have the humans and the parrots, we're going to see whether the parrots are matching the words and the frequency, or whether they speak at higher pitches, and there are some differences. Yeah.
Well, I think my
Oh,
parrots
interesting.
respond, my 2 Amazons respond more to the higher pitch sounds,
Yeah.
music. Anyways.
Yeah, which brings up another point, which is interesting. In English, we don't have tonality with our words, so we can say a word in many different ways, and we all know it's what that word is. But then you look at other languages, particularly the Southeast Asian languages, Chinese, Thai, and all those, and it's not just what you say, but the intonation that goes with the word that determines its meaning. And I always wonder with my birds if they are more inclined towards tonality or not. That do they recognize a word I say regardless of how I say it, or do they only recognize it if it's said with a certain intonation?
That's a great question.
Now, when
Mm.
I talked to Dr. Pepperberg, because she has spoken to our bird club several times, or she says that she just talks to the birds and kind of repeats the words to get them to learn the words, where she'll say it in a sentence. So I talk to my parrot like it's a toddler, and I'll just say, okay, do you want your dinner now? Are you ready for your scrambled eggs? Whatever, and I, use sentence. And I think that, just like your dog, you take your dog for a walk, you want to go for a walk, it knows what you mean, right? And I think the parrots, I assume that my parrot knows more than I realize. So I go ahead and I speak to my parrot constantly.
I do the same thing. And at night, I ask him, are you ready to go to bed, to go into your cage? And then he'll pick up his claw like he's ready. Sometimes, he won't. Okay. And he'll just, look at me like, And, if I'm having lunch, I'll tell him it's lunchtime and he slides right down, look like, what are we having for lunch? Okay. And I really think he knows what I say.
Yes,
And if
they
he's
do.
eating, yeah, and if he's eating and he's hanging over the side, because I have 2 dogs and he loves to feed the dogs, I'll tell him to get in the middle or he's not going to get his food and he'll move over to the middle. So, he does understand and he does listen.
What's amazing is how much of a disconnect there is between the scientific community and people who actually live with parrots. I mean, you still have the vast majority of the scientific community thinking that parrots mimic sounds but are incapable of any intelligence, incapable of using words correctly, understanding words correctly. And as you can see from your first study, the vast majority of people who live with parrots know that they use words in context correctly. I mean, I don't think we're all anthropomorphizing our parrots and misinterpreting what we're seeing. It's very obvious if you live with a parrot that they understand what's going on, but yet trying to prove it to the scientific community at large is such a difficult uphill battle, as Dr. Pepperberg can testify to.
I have another, to piggyback to what you just said. They do understand what they're saying. From my experience, and when I had my lesser male sitting on my lap, and I was petting him, and then I stopped, and I was playing my wordscapes on my tablet, and he got mad, and he bites my finger, like, no, get back to petting me. Never mind, he wants my attention, just like a toddler. I call them my feathered toddlers. So anyway, he grabbed my finger and he bit it hard, and I said, ouch. I says, that hurt, mommy. I said, mommy doesn't have feathers. He says, that hurt, mommy. Why did you do that? Well, after I finished my spiel, he goes, I'm sorry.
Wow.
So I totally believe they understand. You cannot convince me they don't, because like you said, they can mimic, but they use things in proper context. Absolutely. Definitely.
Right. I just told my bird to come down off his perch and he came right down.
There
Okay,
it is.
so he knows what I'm saying.
Yeah, yes.
And he listens.
My Amazon, like I said, uses more sign language, and I'll ask, are you ready, or like whatever, and she puts her beak on my hand, like just goes like that. That means no. That means no. And I'll go up to people want to hold. I go, here's what my bird will do: either won't go, or to say, or go on you, or just say no. It just puts her beak on you, and that means no.
My
So
bird does the same thing.
does?
Yes, like if I want to put it on a perch and it doesn't want to go on that perch, he touches the perch and backs off. Then I'll put on a different perch. Do you want to go on this one? And he'll touch it or back off. And if he wants to take a bath, I get him in the bathroom. It's like, all right, do you want to take a bath? He'll get off onto the shower rod.
Yeah, they know.
Yeah, I'll take my bird for a walk, and she'll see one person on the other side of the street, and she'll yell out, "Hello," like that. to get their attention.
Yeah, they're amazing. It's been really fun for me. It's, you know, a departure from my songbird work. I'm still doing stuff in songbirds, but the parrots are just really interesting and fun to think about because they are, yeah, so smart and their vocal learning abilities are just incredible.
Yeah. Is anybody else
Our-
any questions or comments?
I want to make a comment about even our green Amazon, our yellow nape green Amazon. I know she's 35. When she hears me in the kitchen cooking or getting the dishes out, and she knows I'm sitting down at a table, she's in the room next door, but she can't see me. But she hears the dishes clanking, or she hears me the water running. She hears all the stuff I'm doing in the kitchen. She'll say, "Cracker, cracker, cracker, cracker." She knows I'm cooking, and she wants some food.
Mhm.
Cracker, cracker. So I can't even hide that from her. They're so smart.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'd like to encourage everybody, now that you've learned about all this, if you haven't done the first, survey, please do it. And everybody, if you could just fill out the second survey as well. I think it would be great if we could all help contribute to this fascinating research. Please spread the news, spread the information, post it online. This video will be posted to YouTube, as you know. Please share it around, and let's see if we can get our parents represented in this research.
That would be awesome. Thank you so much. I think the easiest way is just to share that manyparrots.org website because all the info is there.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
I'm going to turn off the recording now. Let's see.